Hey everyone, welcome to Amanda's Book Corner. I'm Amanda. Did you know that April is Arab American Heritage Month? It only started 1 year ago in April 2021, and I tried to celebrate it last year, although I kind of got confused about what countries counted. But this year, I'm really excited to celebrate it again, and I thought that for this list, I'd include a bunch of different books that I've read, that are on my radar, some that I have, some that I don't have yet, that would work for celebrating Arab American Heritage Month. Not all of the authors I included are Arab American. Some of them actually live in Arab countries now, or they live in other countries and either immigrated there or their families immigrated there. I'll include a full list of the 22 Arab countries in the description below, but for this video, I'll try to highlight books from as many of them as I can. Not all of them are included, but I tried to include as many as I could, and this video features 25 or so books. I didn't actually count, but it's between 20 and 30, so hopefully it won't be too long, but I'm going to try to give a nice overview of a bunch of different books that are on my radar that I think you would enjoy as well. First, I'll mention some books that I've read before, as well as books that I have on my physical TBR right next to me, and then after that I'll go into other books that I don't have but would like to collect and read at some point very soon. First up is a book called A Woman Is No Man by Itaf Rum. I read this one in 2019, and it's one of my favorite books I've ever read. It's really stuck with me. It's a really powerful novel. It follows a young woman named Isra who in 1990 she leaves Palestine and she's put into a marriage with a person that she did not choose, and she ends up living in New York City. And we see if she turns from a dreamy, naive girl into someone who's very sad and seems very dissatisfied with how her life turned out. There's some big drama that we're being led up to, but we don't really know what happens until later in the book. Meanwhile, we also get chapters with her daughter named Dea and her experiences in 2018 and how they're very similar to that of her mother's, but also how she starts to forge her own path that's very different from what her mother went through. So this is a really powerful book about being a Palestinian immigrant, and it's about the cultural differences between Palestine and America, some good, some bad, and it's just a really powerful and impactful novel that I encourage everyone to read. A book I read last year and really loved is called Against the Loveless World by Susan Obahawa. This novel is about a Palestinian refugee family, and it follows a young woman named Nar who goes to different jobs and different relationships and goes from being a relatively normal person to getting involved in politics and eventually is in solitary confinement. We don't really know why she's in solitary confinement at the beginning, but over the course we get to see what led to her being imprisoned. This book takes place in Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine, and it's a really informative and inspiring novel. I found it was really interesting and gripping, and I feel like I learned a lot while reading it. So this is one I definitely recommend to everyone that's out there watching. This author also has other books that I've heard good things about and have not read but I would like to read, including one called Mornings in Jenin, which I definitely want to get as soon as I can. Another really powerful novel that I read a few years ago in 2019 is called The Map of Salt and Stars by Zayn Chukadar. This book is really incredible. It starts off in 2011, and there's a Syrian immigrant family living in New York City, and the father dies of cancer, and so the family returns to Syria. The main character is Noor, the youngest of the three siblings, and she's the only one who's never actually lived in Syria before. But it follows as Noor and her mother and two sisters, and some other people as well, end up becoming refugees and having to travel all around the Middle East, from Syria and down south into the north of Africa and eventually to Spain. It covers a lot of different Arab countries, and it also really highlights the refugee crisis that's going on today. But as this family is traveling from country to country in relatively modern times, a parallel timeline follows a fantasy story of a different character who had to dress up as a boy and act as a map maker to get these people around the same general area, actually, about the same places that the real characters are going through. And it has a lot of fantasy and adventure, and it's really interesting how it parallels what's happening with Noor and her family in quote-unquote real times. So this is a really powerful book and one I definitely recommend to everyone, and I really loved the author's writing, and so I also plan to read his new work, which is called The 30 Names of Night. This one came out about a year and a half ago, and I really want to read this one this month. This one is set in New York City, and it follows a trans boy in his search for answers after his mother's death. So this one looks really powerful too, and I do plan to read this one this month. For a nonfiction option, I recommend Conditional Citizens by Lula Lalami. I read this one a little bit over a year ago, and I thought it was really powerful. This is about what it's like to be othered in America specifically, and that can be in terms of your race, or in terms of your religion, or your gender. and I thought it was really powerful. It combines elements that are more memoir and some that are more heavily researched, and it really paints a complete picture. It's a slim book, only about 200 pages, but it does pack a punch and it's really eye-opening. I also have 2 novels by her that I plan to read. I've kind of collected her books and I've completely read them out of order, but I do plan to read 2 of them, and these are the 2 that I have. First is called The Moors Account, and this one's very popular. It's about a Moroccan man who travels to the New World along with some Spanish people, and it shows his perspective on things as they travel there and explore what is now considered North America. Another one that came out a few years ago is called The Other Americans, and this one is about a man who is Moroccan and he gets hit by a car, and it follows the aftermath of that and how it affects different people in his community. So this one also looks really interesting and eye-opening, so I'm excited to read this one and The Moors Account, hopefully sometime this year. One book that I read a few months ago is called The Fugitives by Jamal Majoub. So this is a really fun book. It follows a young man who tries to get his uncle and late father's band back together, a jazz band, and they make their way from Sudan to America because they've been invited to play at an international music festival in Washington, D.C. And it's a really interesting book that is about music, but it's also about their experiences as tourists in America and the kinds of things that they face while they're there. It's powerful, but it's also really fun, and I do love learning about the music. And so this is a really fun one that's set partially in Sudan. I definitely want to read more from this author. He has other books that I'm planning to get to, so expect to see more reviews of his books in the future. One other book that I read about a year ago is called The Wild Fox of Yemen by Threya Al-Montasser. It's a book of poetry, and I have to admit, I really do not understand poetry. I never have. The poems were very interesting, and while I didn't really feel qualified to actually give it a rating because I just don't understand poetry, it is a book I recommend if you do like poetry and would like to read a book of poetry by an author from Yemen. Okay, so now for some books that I have not read, but I have on my physical TBR. One is called Black Mamba Boy by Nadifa Mohammed. This is a Somali author, and I'm really excited to read her books. I've been really interested in reading more about Somalia in particular, and so this is one of the authors that I found that I thought looked really interesting. This is her first book, and it follows a young boy who travels around Africa and the Middle East in search of his family. It starts in 1935 in Yemen, but it travels through several different countries, and it looks like a really powerful and interesting novel. I also want to read her novel, The Orchard of Lost Souls. This one is set in the late 1980s, and it follows 3 different women. One is a 9-year-old girl, one is a widow, and one is a young soldier, and how their lives are affected by the civil war in Somalia. I am aware of the civil war in Somalia and how it's affected well-known people, including Kenan and Ilhan Omar, and I'm interested in learning more about it through a novel like this. Nadifa Mohammed also has another new novel that just came out recently called The Fortune Men, and that one also follows a Somali man, but it follows him as he's accused of a crime that he maybe didn't commit when he lives in England, and so that one also looks really powerful. One other Somali author I found is Shukri Said Sal, and this is her memoir, which is called The Last Nomad, Coming of Age in the Somali Desert. I don't read very many memoirs, but this one looks very interesting, and I don't know much about living a nomadic lifestyle, but this one just really captured my attention. I actually found out about it because of an interview at a local bookstore near where I live, and so I'm really excited to dive into this one. Another one I'm excited to read is called A Pure Heart by Rajia Hasib. This one is set in Egypt, and it follows these 2 sisters. I love any story about sisters because I'm close with my sister. But it follows these 2 women who have been torn apart by living in different parts of the world, and one of them, the one who's living in Egypt, ends up dying, and so it follows her sister who deals with the aftermath of that and returns to Egypt to recover what's left of her sister's life. And so this one looks like a really powerful and probably emotional novel, but I am excited to read this one. A book I got recently is called In the Country of Others by Leila Slimani. This one is about the relationship between Morocco and France. It follows a French woman who falls in love with a Moroccan soldier, and this is during the time of World War II, and it follows their relationship and her time living in Morocco and the kind of conflicts between their 2 countries. So this one is another one that looks pretty powerful. You might recognize the name of the author. She also wrote a popular book called The Perfect Nanny, which I'd also like to read. Finally, another book I got recently is called What Strange Paradise by Omar El-Akid. The author was born in Egypt and grew up in Kuwait, and this book follows refugees from various countries in the area, including Syria and Lebanon, and it follows as they try to escape and the kinds of connections that they form with each other, even with language barriers. It focuses specifically on children, and I think that's a really interesting and powerful look at the refugee crisis, kind of like how The Mouth of Salt and Stars also focus on children who were refugees in the area. It looks powerful and heart-wrenching, but I am excited to read this one. Okay, and now I'll run through some books that I don't have, but I do plan to get at some point, or at least read at some point. Most of these books are available already, although some of them are coming out this year or are about to come out, so I'll let you know. Set in Algeria is a book called A Bookshop in Algiers. The author, Kawthar Adimi, is Algerian. It begins in 1936 when a bookshop is opened, but then eventually the bookshop is forced to close, and it follows Algeria's history in the 20th century, including war and revolution, and it looks like a very powerful book, and I do love books about books, so that makes it high on my list. But I also think it's going to be a very informative read because I don't really know much about Algeria, and I often say that I do like to learn a little bit about history through reading novels and getting kind of a more intimate perspective on things. A book that just came out in March is called Country of Origin by Dalia Azim. This one is set in Egypt, and it follows the political revolution in 1950s Egypt and the personal revolutions of these different family members in the years following that. It follows a teenage girl, she's 17, and her decision to go to America, and it's really a coming-of-age story, and it looks like a really powerful debut novel. Another book related to Egypt is called Love is the Next Country by Randa Jarrar. It's a memoir about a woman who is queer and Muslim and that, and about her experiences living in America. It discusses themes of racism and Islamophobia and what it's like being the daughter of immigrant parents. And it looks like a really interesting and powerful book, and like I said, I don't read very many memoirs, but this one did definitely capture my interest, and I do plan to get it soon. For a book set in Iraq, might I recommend Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Sadawi. I haven't read this one, but it looks really interesting, and it's kind of a retelling of Frankenstein, but a very different kind of Frankenstein than what we saw in the original novel. It's set in Iraq, and it follows the war in US-occupied Baghdad, and it looks like a really powerful and interesting novel. I did read Frankenstein back when I was in college, so I'm interested to see how it was changed to fit with the war in Iraq setting, and it looks really interesting to me. It came out a few years ago, and it's high on my list of books to get. Another debut novel that I'm interested in getting is called Silence is a Sense by Layla Al-Amar. The author is from Kuwait, but this book is about a woman who is a refugee from Syria and what her life is like now that she is living as a refugee in England. To help process what she's gone through, she ends up writing for a magazine anonymously, and through it she explains the refugee experience without really identifying anything about herself. The book has poetic prose, and it looks like a really powerful and internal novel, and I'm definitely excited to read this one. A book that's been on my list for a few years now is called Celestial Bodies by Joka Al-Arthi, and this one is from an author who's from Oman, and the book is set in Oman. It's about 3 women and their rapidly changing country, and what it's like to stay in that country versus immigrate to another place like Canada. I admit that I know very little about Oman, and I'm really excited to read a book set there, and this is a book that I definitely want to read, and I think it'll be a great starting point for learning more about the country. Another book I'm really excited about is called You Exist Too Much by Zayn Arafat. This book is about a Palestinian-American girl, and it follows her experiences with music, writing, and coming out as a queer person. It's told in vignettes, and it looks like a really powerful book, and it's been out for a couple years, and I definitely want to read this one soon. Another book about a Palestinian-American is called The Beauty of Your Face by Sahar Mustafa. It takes place in a very divided America, and it follows a woman who is a teacher and what goes through her mind when a shooter appears at her school where she teaches. So this looks like a very relevant and current book, and a very powerful and impactful one as well. So I'm excited to read this one. A new book that just came out is called Fencing with the King by Diana Abu Jaber. This one draws on King Lear and Arthurian legend, and it tells a story of people that go to Jordan, and they make some interesting and dangerous discoveries that threaten their lives. So this book has only been out since March 15th, but it's definitely high on my list of books that I definitely want to get right away. I like that it blends legend and puts it in a different setting, and so I'm really excited for this one. A book that came out last year is called The Arsonist City by Hala Alyan. It's about a family with a Syrian mother and a Lebanese father, and the 3 children are American. But when the father dies and there's a new patriarch in the family, they decide to go back to Beirut, and while they're there, they're confronted with war, with refugees, with their religion, and it looks like a really interesting book with a kind of different perspective than I often see in books like this. And so this one came out about a year ago, and I definitely want to get it. I'd also be interested in reading the author's other books as well. Another book that's set in Sudan is Lyrics Alley by Layla Abu Layla, and this one, kind of like the other one I mentioned, The Fugitives, this one also has to do with music and about Sudan's culture. It's about an affluent Sudanese family, and it has to do with the conflict between more traditional views and more modern views. This author also has other books that look really interesting to me, so if I like this one, I'll definitely go out and get some more from her as well. And finally, another book that came out this year is called No Land to Light On by Yara Zeeb. And this one is about a family who is torn apart. They're Syrian refugees, and one ends up being in America, and the other one goes back to Syria, and then they're not able to reconnect because of political reasons. And so this one looks like a really devastating and powerful book, and I do plan to get this one soon as well. I've heard good things about it, and I do hope to read it hopefully this year. Okay, so that was a lot of books, and I tried to narrow it down. There are actually lots of other books that I could have included, and I didn't want to make this list too long for you. So hopefully something here caught your eye. There's plenty of books that I've read, but also so many more that I have not read and I would like to get to. So let me know what you think of these recommendations, and also please let me know if you have other recommendations of Arab books that would fit for Arab American Heritage Month. Remember that Arab American Heritage Month is in April, so I encourage you to read at least one book by an Arab author this month. But of course, it's also great to always read books by diverse authors year-round, and so don't be limited to just April, because it's great to read these books in every single month of the year, and keep your reading as diverse as possible. So I hope you enjoyed this list, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it and other books you recommend. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and to make sure you don't miss any more of my videos, please ring the bell to get all my notifications. I put out about 2 to 3 book review videos every week, as well as 1 to 2 other videos like this one, including vlogs and listicles. So thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!